Genesis chapter 45 is a beautiful chapter that is filled with lots and lots of revelations. It begins with Joseph revealing his identity to his terrified brothers. It ends with those very brothers revealing that their father's beloved son Joseph is actually not dead, as he had always thought. Rather, that he's actually living in Egypt and is a huge ruler down there. And while the events of Genesis are factual, this particular passage also serves as an example of a beautiful and excellent storytelling. So Genesis chapter 45 provides the emotional payoff that I've been building over the last several chapters. Joseph, unrecognized by his 10 oldest brothers, when they arrived in Egypt to buy grain, earlier on in Genesis chapter 42. If you haven't watched episode 42, please pick it up on our website. That is www.abdiministries.org, or you could scan the QR code that is on your screen to get more details there. Otherwise, when they'd come to buy more grain at the time, and he had not chosen, he did not reveal himself to them. Instead, Joseph had tested them by both providing generously and treating them harshly as well. Generously in chapter 43 and harshly in our previous episode, chapter 44. Now, Joseph's ultimate goals have not yet been stated. In this passage and the later, we will learn that his intent was to provide for his extended family food during these times of famine. All we have seen in the text so far is Joseph's struggle to keep his emotions in check. That was especially true when seeing his younger brother Benjamin in Genesis 43, verses 29 to verses 30. Now, when Judah made an impassioned plea, begging to sacrifice himself in the place of Benjamin, and specifically mostly to save Benjamin, Joseph's emotion spilled over in Genesis 44, verses 33 to 34. Now, at this point in time, Joseph was a very powerful Egyptian official, so he had actually struggled to maintain a level of public dignity. He first sent all his servants out of the room, and then he was left alone with his brothers, and so he began to sob loudly and uncontrollably. This weeping man was so loud enough that the men that he sent out heard it anyway. In fact, later on, we shall see the Bible saying that even the sound was so loud, it reached into Pharaoh's palace. And how finally he blurted out his identity, and the men, that is the brothers, were drum-struck. Now, to convince them, Joseph told them that he was the one that they sold into slavery all those years ago in chapter 45, verses 1 to 3. We're going to study that in a bit. Already guilt-ridden over their crime that they committed in earlier chapters, that is, I think it was 42, verses 21 to 23. Joseph's brothers will not be astounded, had been stoned, and they'd been stoned and terrified. It was as though piercing. It was as though getting a spear and just taking it through their hearts. And how in this situation they naturally would have expected to suffer Joseph's vengeance. Instead, Joseph rushed to assure them that God was ultimately in control of sending him to Egypt as a teenager. What they did with evil motives, God allowed for the good of their family and the world. Romans 8:28. Joseph had clearly spent many, many, many years, definitely without a doubt, processing all his struggles. He had reached the remarkable conclusion that God's intent was to make him a ruler in Egypt to save them, that is the family and the rest of the world, from famine. Now, Joseph was urgent to see their father, Jacob. In fact, he immediately began to urge his brothers to return back to Canaan, back up their father and all that they owned, and move and resettle down here in Egypt. Now, when Pharaoh learned about the situation, he was very, very joyful. I mean, he had never seen Joseph's relatives, but now here he is hearing that Joseph, his brother, is actually here. So what did he do? He commanded Joseph that he should provide intensely, immensely for his family. He sought to reassure them they would be given the best of the land of Egypt. In addition, he commanded to be sent back to Canaan to carry back the family and all that they owned and come back here down in Egypt. So Jacob's sons were then loaded with lots of gates, lots of money, and of course, asses or donkeys. These were all meant to serve as evidence that their story, the story, the brothers would then tell their father Jacob that was actually true. And what that story is that Joseph is alive. Earlier on, 20 years ago, they lied to their father that Joseph had been eaten by what animal. But now they've got to come clean. They've got to tell the truth. But then they need evidence to convince their father that Joseph indeed is alive. And so here Joseph provides all the evidence. Jacob was then asked to move, of course, his family down to Egypt to survive the famine, but as one might, of course, expect. What do you expect? He nearly did not survive the good news. And the guy almost collapsed to death. Anyhow, the son he thought was 20 years dead is alive. Not only is he alive, he's also immensely the one most powerful person down there in Egypt. Amen? So, through some medical episode or simple shock, Jacob's initial reaction was kind of stunned silence. Finally, he was convinced. He's a very hard guy to convince, but he eventually was convinced. And God blessed him with the return, of his long lost son. And he agreed to the plan of moving down there to Egypt. He was determined, without a doubt, to see his son, Joseph, before he dies. We're going to see that in a bit, in episode, in verses 25 to 28. That is it. That's basically the summary of Genesis 45. To get the full episode, please scan the QR code that is on your screen, or go to our YouTube channel, search for the handle Abdi Ministries. You can also find this on our website, that is www.abdiministries.org.